A grandmother in a low adobe village in the north of New Mexico stands in her doorway at dusk and calls a child in from the ditch. The light is going amber and then blue over the cottonwoods, and the water in the acequia is running high and brown with the afternoon rain off the mountains. And the boy is crouched at the bank, the way children always are, close to the one thing he has been told 100 times to stay away from. She calls his name once, and then she says the other thing, the thing her own grandmother said to her in this same doorway 60 years before. Do not go down to the water after dark, because she walks there, the weeping woman. And if she hears you crying, or if she sees you alone at the edge of the ditch, she will think you are one of her own, and she will take you down into the water with her, and you will never come home. The boy comes in, he always comes in, and later that night with the windows open, to the smell of wet earth and irrigation, and the sound of the cicadas winding down, someone in that house hears it. A woman's voice out on the acequia far off, calling for her children.
Ay, mis hijos, ay, mis hijos.
And no one goes to look. She is the most enduring ghost of the American Southwest. From the villages of the north of New Mexico, down through El Paso, from the Rio Grande to the Santa Fe River, to 10,000 nameless irrigation ditches and dry washes, everyone knows her. A tall, thin woman in a long white dress, long dark hair wet or tangled, always by the water, always at night, weeping and crying out for the children she drowned, and taking any child she finds out alone by the water in the dark. She glides instead of walking. She leaves no footprints. And her cry seems to come from the wrong distance so that you can never tell how close she is until it is too late. This is a story about her, but it is not really a ghost story, because the thing I want to show you is that the woman by the water cannot be proven and does not need to be, and that everything she is made of is real and documented and older and heavier and sadder than any ghost. She is not one spirit. She is 500 years of them stacked one on top of another. And if you dig down through the layers of her, you pass through a recorded prophecy from before the fall of an empire, and a real woman at the very center of the conquest of a continent, and real children drowned in real desert water, and real mothers pushed past the edge of what a person can carry. The ghost is the smallest true thing in the whole story. Everything underneath her is worse. So let us dig down. Start with the tale itself, the one most people know, the one that has been told at kitchen tables and around fires and in the backs of cars driving past dark water for as long as anyone can remember. There was a young woman, and in most of the tellings she is beautiful, and she is poor, and often she is called Maria. A man came through, and he was wealthier than she was, sometimes a Spaniard, and sometimes a ranchero, a man from a class above her, and he loved her for a while. They had children, 2 of them usually, and sometimes more. And then the man's love cooled the way that kind of love cools, and he left her. And in the cruelest tellings, he left her to marry a woman of his own station, a woman his family would accept, and he meant to take the children with him and leave her with nothing at all. And something in her broke. She took the children down to the river in the dark, and she put them in the water, and she held them there, and the river carried them away. And then, and only then, standing on the bank, with the water going quiet again, she understood what she had done. In some tellings, she walked into the river after them and drowned herself. In others, she simply wandered the bank until she died of grief. And when she came to the gates of heaven, she was stopped, and she was asked where her children were, and she could not answer. And she was turned away and told she could not enter until she brought them with her. So she went back down to the water to look, and she has been looking ever since, weeping and searching and crying out for them, and mistaking other people's children for her own. Hold on to her for a moment before she becomes a monster. Because the people who have kept this story alive and told it right for generations always tell you the grief first. She is a mother who lost her children and lost heaven with them and cannot stop searching. The horror of her is real, but it sits on top of a sorrow that is bottomless. And if you tell her only as a thing that snatches children in the dark, you have told her wrong. Now here's where this stops being a folk tale and becomes something stranger. Because here is where the record opens up under your feet. She is older than that story. She is older than the man who left. older than the river Maria knew, older than the Spanish word for the children she called out to. She was weeping in this part of the world before there was a Spain in it at all. We know this because a friar wrote it down. His name was Bernardino de Sahagún, a Franciscan who came to New Spain in the years after the conquest and spent decades working with Nahua elders and scribes to record their world in their own language before it vanished. And the great work that came out of that labor, the Florentine Codex, is one of the most important records in the whole history of the Americas. And in it, among the accounts the elders gave of the years before their empire fell, there is a list of omens, 8 of them. A comet that split the daytime sky, a temple that burst into flame and could not be put out, a column of fire, a lake that boiled up and flooded houses on a windless day, and the 6th, the one the accounts say frightened the people more than any of the others. For many nights a woman was heard weeping, a voice moving through the streets of the city in the dark, crying out for her children. The codices render her words as a mother's, asking where she can take them now, where she can hide them, saying they must go, saying they are lost. Night after night the people lay in their houses and listened to a woman grieving in the streets for children who were already gone. And no one could find her, and no one could make her stop. And then the ships came, and Hernan Cortés came, and within 2 years, the world she had been weeping for was ended. A weeping woman in the streets at night crying for her lost children as the omen of the end of a world. That is not a campfire embellishment. That is in the record, set down by a friar from the mouths of the people who had lived through it. And she did not come from nowhere, even then. Behind the omen stand the goddesses. There was Tihuacoatl, Snake Woman, a goddess of motherhood and midwives in war. And Sahagún records that she too was seen and heard as a weeping woman moving through the night, crying for her children. She was said to rule the Chihuateteo, the spirits of women who had died in childbirth. Women the Mexica honored as fallen warriors, and also feared because it was believed they lingered at the crossroads in the dark and could steal a child or strike a person with madness. And there was Calcutlicu, she of the jade skirt, the goddess of the rivers and the lakes and the standing water. And the record is plain and grim about her, that she was feared, that she pulled people under and overturned their boats and drowned them. The ceremonies to the water and the rain were in that civilization, as in others of its time, sometimes ceremonies of sacrifice. And children were among the offerings. And it was believed that a child's weeping was itself a good sign for the rain to come. I set that down the way the historians do, soberly, because a culture that sacrificed to its gods was doing what a great many ancient cultures did. And the point here is only this. Long before any European saw this land, it already held a weeping mother tied to lost children, and a goddess who drowned people in the water. The pieces of her were already here. The conquest did not invent her. It just gave her 500 years of new reasons to cry. Which brings us to the woman the legend blamed. Her name was Malintzin. She was a Nahua girl, born to a noble family somewhere on the Gulf Coast. And while she was still a child, she was sold or given into slavery and passed from one group to another. And by the time she was a teenager, she was among the people who handed her to the Spanish in 1519. She spoke Nahuatl, the language of the Mexica, and so she became the hinge on which the entire conquest turned. She was the interpreter. Cortés could not speak to any of the peoples of the interior, except through her. She translated and she advised and she read the politics of a shattering world. And she bore Cortés a son, a boy remembered as one of the first mestizos, one of the first children of the two worlds that were grinding together. The Spanish baptized her and called her Doña Marina, and history remembered her as La Malinche. And for centuries, history did something unforgivable to her. It made her the traitor, the woman who sold her people to the invaders, the native Eve who damned a continent. And the popular imagination fused her with the weeping woman until the two were nearly one. A mother who betrayed and destroyed her own. I want to say this as plainly as I can. There is no evidence that the real Malintzin ever harmed a child. She was a girl who had been enslaved and handed from hand to hand, and dropped into the middle of the collision of two empires with no power of her own, except her mind and her tongue. And she survived. and she became the mother of something new. The traitor was invented later by men who needed someone to blame for a wound too large to look at directly, and it clung to her for 500 years. Modern Chicana scholars have spent a generation pulling her back out from under it. The writer Gloria Anzaldúa, in her book on the borderlands, sets La Malinche beside the Virgin of Guadalupe, and beside La Llorona as the three mothers a Chicana inherits, not as the betrayer, but as the one who was betrayed, the survivor, the mother of a people who did not exist before her. So when the legend hangs the weeping woman's crime around the neck of La Malinche, it is not telling history, it is repeating a slander. And an honest telling of this ghost has to stop and say so and set it down and not pick it back up. So you have the goddesses and the omen and the wronged woman. And over the long colonial centuries, they fused the way stories fuse into the tale of Maria and the river. And then that tale traveled. It rode north with Spanish and Mexican settlement, up the Rio Grande into what is now New Mexico and Texas and Arizona and California. And as it went, it did the thing that living legends do. It reached out and grabbed hold of the actual landscape and would not let go. It attached itself to the Rio Grande and to the Santa Fe River, and above all, to the acequias, the communal irrigation ditches that every village dug by hand and shared, and to the arroyos, the dry washes that lie empty and dusty most of the year and then in the monsoon fill in minutes with a wall of brown floodwater that arrives with no warning and takes anything in the channel. She became the ghost of the frontier waterways. She became the sound the desert water makes in the dark. And you have to understand the water there to understand why she took root so deep. In that country, water is scarce and sacred and contested and lethal all at once. It is life because the whole village lives or dies by the ditch. And it is death because the same ditch and the same wash that keeps the crops alive drowns a child every few years. Children swim in the acequias in the desert heat. They skateboard down the dry arroyos. And every so often the monsoon comes up fast and the wash fills, and one of them does not get out. So the weeping woman lives precisely where the danger lives, at the ditch bank at dusk, on the riverbank in the dark, at the mouth of the arroyo when the sky turns green and the air smells like coming rain. A ghost that drowns children is a memory device for a real and constant danger, a warning worn smooth by 1,000 tellings. And she works. She keeps children off the banks after dark better than any fence ever built. Picture the ground she haunts, a village of low adobe strung along a river, and off the river, the acequia madre, the mother ditch running clear and cold under a row of old cottonwoods, and off that the smaller ditches threading out to every field, dug and cleaned, and shared by everyone who drinks from them. At night, the cottonwoods go black against the last light, and the water keeps talking to itself in the dark, and the smell is wet earth and cut alfalfa and mud. Beyond the green line of the ditches, the land goes dry and pale, and the arroyos cut through it, empty channels of sand and stone that look like the safest place in the world to a child on a hot afternoon, right up until the monsoon builds a wall of brown water 20 miles up in the mountains and sends it down the wash without a sound of warning. That is the country. Water that is life on one bank and death on the other. Sometimes the same water, and a cry out on it at night that could be a woman, or could be the wind funneling down the ditch. And no child raised there who is honest will tell you they never once stopped to listen. That is the first thing she does. But she does more than one thing, which is part of why she never died out. The tale is a cautionary one, and it pulls triple duty. It keeps children away from the water. It keeps them home after dark and in from the mountains and the desert and the roads. And in its older and harder uses, it kept women inside the lines that a patriarchal frontier society had drawn for them. Because underneath the drowning is also a warning about a woman's desire and a woman's disobedience, about what is said to happen to a woman who loves the wrong man and lets her passion rule her. One story, 3 kinds of control, all of them running on the same current of fear. And that efficiency is a big part of why she has outlasted every other ghost around her. And there is one more reason she belongs to that ground, the deepest one. The borderlands are a mestizo place, a country born of exactly the collision she came out of. Indigenous and Spanish blood and story, braided together into something that is neither and both. and she carries both in one body. She is the Nahua mother goddess, and she is the Spanish colonial ghost at the very same time. She belongs to that country because she is made of the same wound the country is made of. When Gloria Anzaldúa writes about the border as an open wound, where two worlds grind together and bleed, the weeping woman is walking that wound with her white dress trailing in the ditch water, because she is what the wound sounds like. And there is a last turn of that same key, and I want to touch it lightly, because it deserves that. A river in this country is not only water, it is also a border, and a border is a place of crossing and of loss. It is where families are divided, and where people go over in the dark and do not all come out the other side. A weeping woman standing at the water at night, grieving for children she cannot reach, is very nearly the perfect ghost for a country defined by who did and did not make it across. The old Rio Grande that carries her legend is the same river that still today swallows people trying to cross it. And I say that with restraint and with sorrow, and not as any kind of point to score. Only that the water she haunts has never once stopped taking children, and the people who live along it have always known that better than anyone. Now, the origin of her is genuinely and permanently contested, and I want to be honest that no one can hand you a single clean answer. Was she Quihuacoatl, or Chalquiuhtlicue, or the Omen, or Malintzin, or a pure Spanish colonial invention grafted onto native soil, or all of them at once? Scholars have argued every side. The folklorist Ben Radford, who spent a whole book on her, makes the case that her real power is precisely that she cannot be pinned to any one woman. That because she is no one in particular, she can be everyone's grief. And that is exactly why she survives, while sharper and more specific ghosts fade. The tale itself refuses to hold still. In some versions, there is no faithless man at all, and the children drown through a mother's simple negligence, which turns the whole thing into a pure and terrible warning to watch your children near the water. In the Ciudad Juarez, telling she is a poor woman who drowns her children in the Rio Grande to free herself to marry a rich man. Name her Maria or leave her unnamed. Drown them in rage or lose them by accident. Every community that took her in reshaped her to fit its own fears. And the contradictions are not sloppiness. They are fingerprints. Each variant is the mark of a different set of hands that made her theirs. She has been kept alive too by people who tell her with care, and they deserve their names in this. In New Mexico, the cultural historian Nazario Garcia recorded the voices of the elders of the Rio Puerco Valley before they were gone, and the weeping woman lives in those recordings the way she lives nowhere else. In the plain speech of people who grew up believing their mothers had heard her. And Rudolfo Anaya, the writer often called the godfather of Chicano literature, gave her a novel of her own, and he handed her back her sorrow and her stature. These are the tradition bearers, and the bar for telling her honestly is set by them. An elder in a northern village who has told this story her whole life should be able to hear it told again and feel that it was honored and not mined. And people still see her, or say they do. There is an account from Santa Fe in the 1930s of a family who watched a woman in white move down toward a creek at dusk and vanish at the water's edge, leaving no track in the soft ground. There are recordings people swear catch her voice out on the acequias. I do not offer any of it as proof, because it is not proof. It is living folklore, which is a different and in some ways a more durable thing. Proof dies when it is disproven. Folklore only grows. And she is not a museum piece. She is working folklore right now this year. New Mexico children are still told in earnest not to play in the arroyos, or she will take them. And here's the detail that says everything about how thin the line is between the ghost and the real danger she stands for. Since the middle of the 1980s, the city of Albuquerque has run a water safety campaign built directly on her to keep children from drowning in the flash-flooding ditches. And the figure they use is called the Ditch Witch. They took a 500-year-old omen, a weeping goddess, the ghost of a conquered empire, and they turned her into a drowning prevention poster, because the danger she was always pointing at is still killing children in the same water. The ancient prophecy and the municipal safety flyer are the very same warning, and nothing about that is a joke. It is the legend doing in the present tense the exact job it was built to do, which brings us to the hardest part, and the truest. Because the weeping woman keeps absorbing real horror, And there are real Lloronas in the record. Real mothers who stood in real water with their own children, and their stories are heavier than any apparition. Over the years, there have been documented cases in the borderland rivers of mothers who drowned their children, cases that the communities around them folded almost helplessly back into the legend, because the legend was the only shape large enough to hold them. And there is one I have to tell you about carefully, because she was a real and suffering person and not a plot twist. In 1986 in Houston, a woman named Juana Leia, who had endured years of violence at home, took her 7 children to a bayou and began putting them into the water. 2 of them died. And afterward, in the wreckage of what had happened, she said that she was La Llorona. I set that down as gently and as briefly as I know how. Because the thing that matters about it is not shock. What matters is that a real woman crushed by violence and poverty and a mind in crisis reached in the worst moment of her life for the oldest story her culture had and named herself the Weeping Woman. Because that legend already held a place for exactly her kind of despair, and if this lands on you hard, then sit with the plain fact underneath it, that these stories touch real desperation, that they are woven out of violence and poverty and untreated crisis, and that there are right now people at that same edge, and there is help, and there is no shame in reaching for it. And no version of this legend should ever be told as though a drowning mother were a monster, instead of a person the world had failed. That is what she is made of. So here is the fact check, and I am going to land it soft. The ghost cannot be proven. No one has ever produced the Weeping Woman. But the 6th omen is written in a real 16th century codex, in the words of the people who lived it. The conquest is real, and it ended a world. La Malinche was a real woman wronged twice. Once by the empire that enslaved her, and once by the legend that slandered her. The goddesses were really worshipped, and the children really were given to the water. And the drownings are real. They happen every monsoon season in the same arroyos, to children whose grandmothers told them the exact warning that grandmother in the doorway told her boy. Everything the Weeping Woman is made of is true. The only part that is not is the woman herself, and she is the least of it. So do not end on a scare, because a scare would be a lie about what she is. End instead on what she really is. She weeps because the culture that made her has 500 years of real reasons to weep, and not one of them is closed. She is the mother goddess mourning a world that the conquest ended. She is Malinche slandered across 5 centuries for the crime of surviving and bearing a new people into being. She is every real mother who lost a child to the river or the ditch, and every desperate one that violence and poverty pushed past the edge. And she is the ghost of a border that is still to this day a place where families are divided and people are lost, and children go into the water and do not come out. She is how a whole people carries a grief too large to hold any other way, by giving it a white dress and a voice and setting it walking by the water so that the grief at least has somewhere to go. The grandmother in the doorway knew that even if she would not have said it in those words. That is why she called the boy in. Not only because a ghost might take him, though, but because the water is real and it does take children, and the story is how her people have carried that truth from the fall of an empire down to a Tuesday evening in a village of low adobe, unbroken from mother to child for 500 years. The water is still out there in the dark. It is still running high and brown after the mountain rain. And on some nights, if you are near it, you will hear something on the current that could be a woman or could be the wind moving through the ditch. That was The Weeping Woman, written and performed by the author, me, James Cawley. Here is what stays with me. We tell each other she is a monster, a thing to fear at the edge of the ditch, but she was never the monster. She is the grief. She is 500 years of it, poured into the only shape big enough to carry it. A conquered mother crying for a world that ended. A woman the history books turned into a villain for surviving. And every real mother, in every dry little village along the river, who ever knelt in the mud. We did not invent her to scare our children away from the arroyo. We invented her because some sorrow is too large to say out loud, so a whole people agreed to say it as a ghost instead. My name is James Cawley, and you are listening to Dust and Echoes. If the stories that stay with you are the old ones, the ones with real grief under the legend, and real history under the fear, then you are in the right place. And I am glad we found you. There is a new story every week, and the whole vault is waiting at enterthedust.com. So the next time the monsoon comes, and the arroyo runs full in the dark, and you hear something out there that could be the wind, or could be a woman, do not be afraid of her. Just listen. And remember what she is really crying for. And remember, the water keeps what it takes. But the grief we carry ourselves.